President Obama left for the Paris Climate Conference on the heels of a shooting at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado where 3 people were killed. At the time, he said this.
My hope is that once again, this spurs a conversation and action, and I will continue to present those things that I can do administratively, but in the end of the day, Congress, states, local governments are going to have to act in order to make sure that we're preventing people who are deranged or have violent tendencies from getting weapons that can magnify the damage that they do.
It spurred no conversation. Now the president has come home to another mass killing. This time it's at a center for people with developmental disabilities in San Bernardino, California. This was the scene as the active shooter situation was first being reported. At the time of this taping, police are saying, quote, upwards of 14 people are dead and upwards of 14 more are wounded. Joining me now to talk more about this are John Rosenthal from Stop Handgun Violence, who spent decades fighting for responsible gun laws. John, good to see you. And Robert Mendoza, forensic psychologist. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. And obviously, we're handicapped by the fact that it is so early on here. But Robert, if I can start with you, criminologists say, the number of mass killings is no greater than it was 10 years ago. But the average person sitting at home doesn't buy that for 6 seconds. What's going on? What's happening?
Actually, those criminologists might want to pick up a more recent journal. Actually, mass killings, not just mass shootings, but people killed in mass shootings, actually is on the rise the past 4 or 5 years.
So what's happening?
I think that we have, as suggested, a culture. There's a culture shift. We have a much smaller world due to media and through immediate access through social media. There is actually now studies that say influencing of copycat events are occurring. We're seeing actually a shift in what we thought 20 years ago was sort of a static incident.
So when you say this copycat thing, do you buy into the Anderson Cooper school of reporting where we shouldn't even say the names of the shooters for fear that it inspires others to want their name at the head of the CNN broadcast?
I think everything is on the table now because, as I said, I think we're seeing a shift in the kind of scientific thinking we had before, which was we really can't prevent these things, we can't identify these people, and we're now starting to see that the models of threat assessment now can identify people early on. They call it a pathway to violence. The FBI actually has a new targeted organization, the Behavioral Science Task Force, actually is looking at ways to identify these people and what motivates them, including having their name and having their image on TV. These things spur them on.
So let me get back to you in a second. I want to get to the initial question though with you, John Rosenthal. What is going on? It's not just the proliferation of weapons. There's got to be something more added to that mix, is there not?
Look, we've always had mental illness in this country. We're not unique to that. Every country has mental illness. We just happen to arm everyone with military-style weapons and large-capacity ammunition magazines, the common denominator in all the mass shootings, without detection. 33 states, 5,000 gun shows. Even Al-Qaeda has YouTube videos saying go to the U.S. gun shows where you can buy military-style weapons without an ID or a background check. And Jim, we had an assault weapon ban until 2004. It expired. Since 2004, in the 10 years, we've seen an increase in mass shootings. Since Sandy Hook less than 3 years ago, 160 school shootings. And as the Washington Post reported, every day now, we have had one or more mass shooting in the United States every single day of 2015. We've reached
That's 4 or more people wounded or killed by gunfire.
That's right. We have reached a critical mass of unrestricted access to military-style weapons in this country, and we reap what we sow.
But even when you tamp it down just a little bit, the FBI is reporting on Black Friday, largest number of permits, background checks done ever on a Black Friday, 185,000, where people are complying with the law and doing things legally. I want to get back to you. I've never heard anybody say before, except rhetorically, that we actually can predict these things and figure out who these mass shooters are going to be. Is that rhetoric or is that?
It is. It's not only not just rhetoric, there is some science that now begins to back it up. At one of the places you would not think would ever have a conference like this, in Disneyland, there was a conference recently for threat assessment individuals. And the whole time was spent talking about this pathway to violence, early identification of individuals. Remember, mass shootings, these aren't impulsive things. These are planned, organized, intentful things. And what we have found over and over again, with a small percentage of exceptions, there is a way to identify these people early on in these
Give me
threat
an
assessment.
example of one mass shooter in the last handful of years who with this threat assessment thing. I mean, I'm hoping you're right. I don't mean to be hostile to this. One mass shooter who you could have, based on publicly available information, do a threat assessment on and can prevent him from doing what they did.
So you're asking me to prove something that didn't happen.
Something that did happen.
But I'm suggesting that the FBI actually took a database of these identified individuals early on that they tracked, either through hospitalization where they thought the person might be violent. They applied this threat assessment models, which looks at family members, law enforcement. They bring them together. It's called the knock and talk version. They go knock on the door of these people and say, we have some concerns. They identify these people. And in 400 cases that they identified, only one of them ended up converting to a moment of mass violence.
Are you smiling or smirking? I can't tell. Are you smirking in derision or are you smiling in agreement?
After every mass shooting, we always talk about everything else but unrestricted access to the firearms.
But John Rosenthal, while I admire your work, if you're a betting man, what would you say is the likelihood that Congress will even talk about it, much less do it? You've heard this 1,000 times. If 20 dead 6- and 7-year-olds in Connecticut don't cause this dysfunctional Congress to at least sit down and talk, then nothing's going to convince them to talk, right?
No, I said on MSNBC after the Sandy Hook massacre when asked, will this finally do it? I said no, but maybe if 20 members of Congress were killed in their chairs. But the fact remains that we can find these people before they shoot by requiring a background check and having some accountability.
John,
but the
90% of America agrees on it. A vast majority of NRA members agree on it. And you can't even get a compromise bill through Congress like the Toomey Mansion thing. There was a tamped down background check thing.
Right. And every single day, 90 more Americans die, and the majority of Americans don't care enough. And until they do, like President Obama says, we have to get used to this.
You think there's more than, obviously weapons are a central part of this,
Sure.
but you don't think guns are the central issue that needs addressing, or do you?
I have a different paradigm that I look at.
What is
I
that?
would say guns in and of themselves, and for instance, schizophrenia in and of itself, those things in and of themselves are no more important in identifying the individual, which is the whole idea to prevent. They
Then
are.
what?
They're no different than each other. I mean, whether you have mental illness or whether you have a gun, which causes you to be more violent, to me, those are just mechanisms by which the individual then carries out the act.
But there are a huge percentage of people who have mental illness, and there's an infinitesimally small percentage of those with mental illness who have a gun.
I'm suggesting that those are variables that you attempt to account for. My issue as a behavioral scientist is to attempt to identify these individuals regardless of what mechanism ends up being the act of violence that they end up
Without
using with us.
violating the privacy rights of average Americans who've done nothing wrong.
There are some questions about that, certainly.
How about, is there, I don't mean to dismiss, and it sounds like I am, the gun control agenda. Within the realm of doability, a word that I just created, in the immediate future, John Rosenthal, what do we do? Societally, what do we do? Legislatively, what do we do? We only have 30 seconds. What do we do?
I'm probably the only gun owner at this table. So
That is probably, well, at least it's true in my case.
So
he doesn't want to say. Go
what
ahead.
we've done in Massachusetts, accountability on the part of gun owners, dealers, manufacturers, and law enforcement. We're the model for the nation. We're an urban industrial state with the toughest gun laws and the lowest firearm fatality rate of any state in the nation, except for Hawaii. So we're the model. And eventually, whether it's, as Leon Urer said in his last book, God in Ruins, whether it's 400 kids at one time or a couple members of Congress at one time, at some point there will be a tipping point.
Robert Mendoza, thank you for
Pleasure.
sharing your thoughts. John Rosenthal, good to see you, sadly, I guess.